Welcome to the Straits Times Budget 2024 Roundtable, brought to you by UOB. I'm Lee Su Shyan, Associate Editor and Senior Columnist of the Straits Times, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. Today's topic is on staying united amid greater uncertainty, and we have our panel of experts to discuss this in more detail. Let me introduce our panelists. On my left, we have Mr. Kok Ping Soon. He's the CEO of the Singapore Business Federation. On his left, we have Mr. Alvin Liew, Senior Economist and Senior Vice President, Global Economics and Markets Research at UOB. And on his left, we have Ms. Irene Tai. She is the Energy, Utilities and Resources Tax Partner at PwC Singapore. And last but not least, we have Associate Professor Walter Theseira, and he's from the SUSS. Thank you for joining us today. We hope that you will have a great session. And without further ado, let me start. So, panelists, Budget 2024 has been favourably received by many. PM Lee has commented that it sets a stronger foundation for Singapore as it enters its next phase of development. So cost of living worries are being addressed. Workers concerned about jobs, they're getting retraining help. So these are some of the themes that we hope to cover later. But maybe first, can we set the stage and let's have your overall impression of the budget before we talk more specifically. So, Ping Soon, if I could start with you, what's your main takeaway from the budget?
Sure, thank you, Susan. I think compared to last year's budget, which has a comparatively heavier focus on social issues, I think this year's budget has addressed some of the economic challenges that we have. So I think on the whole, it's a bit more balanced. I think businesses certainly welcome DPM's Lawrence Wong restatement that one of the key government's priority is to ensure a strong, vibrant and dynamic economy. And we should not make any apologies for growth. Of course, not growth at all costs, because that is the only basis for Singaporeans to continue to have a good life and good jobs on a sustained basis. And we would have noted from the budget that DPM Wong has backed that intent with both short-term measures to address the here and now business cost challenges and longer-term measures to build our capabilities. Take the 1.3 billion enterprise support package, for instance. I think like the assurance package for citizens, it has something for everyone, right? That 50% corporate income tax rebate with a minimum cash of 2,000, even for those companies who do not pay tax, but at least employ one local. Well, actually that means all SMEs will benefit. And keeping the maximum loan at $500,000 would allow the Singapore SMEs to have access to credit when situations continue to be quite tough. But I think what's more significant is that if you look at it, the amount of money that's being invested for long-term capability, you do a back of the envelope, is almost $13 billion, 10 times that for the short-term measures. It's significant, with money going into productivity, research, innovation, AI, future energy, and even things like, as I say, AI. I think these are very significant. So on the whole, I think the measures would help to restore our competitiveness. I think it will help us build capabilities and foster collaboration among the industry ecosystem.
Okay, we'll talk a bit more about competitiveness later on.
Sure.
Alvin.
Yes, the budget is very comprehensive this time around. In my view, it's also juxtaposed against the Forward Singapore, the measures that have been put in place. I think while we are looking at a lot of the measures that are building on capabilities for the future, but also the recognition that we need to address those short-term issues on costs, on higher business operations costings. We see this budget as been trying to address a lot of these issues, but yet not trying to, I guess, forget about what we are looking for towards the future itself. And we look at it, there's also a lot of measures on sustainability, and then not to mention in terms of the changing landscape for the labour force itself, the employability, especially for the mid-career workers. So those are things that this budget is trying to address. It's not going to, a lot of the measures, a lot of things that I just talked about, it's not going to be fully addressed in one single budget. But you can see that from this budget itself, it builds that foundation for the next step, next one, and the one after that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, hearing more about this, preparing for the future.
Preparing for the future, that's correct.
Irene.
Yeah, I feel like in this budget, we can really feel that the government is listening to the people and the businesses. It's reacting to rising cost of business.
Yes.
It's reacting to the rising cost of living. But at the same time, not forgetting to think for the people as well, to making big future bets on our future growth in terms of the AI, in terms of sustainability. You know, Minister says, get it done. You know, we need to transit to a clean fuel, energy resources. So I think that's loud and clear. Even the Financial Development Fund, it also has an element of supporting green transition financing. So I think that's great, you know, short term and long term.
Okay, we'll talk a bit more about that. And Prof, please.
So, you know, I think about it as maybe taking baby steps towards the next story that we're going to write in Singapore. And the reason why I say that is that there are a lot of significant changes that are necessary that were actually outlined in Forward SG as well. I mean, we think about the aging population, right? How do we address that? How do we address increasing job and technological disruption for businesses and workers? What about the sustainability transition? And all of this has to be done, I think, against the backdrop, as DPM said, of maybe getting 2 to 3% growth, you know, if everything goes well. And there are lots of reasons to think that things will not go well, right, with geopolitical tensions and so on. So I think in this budget, we see some early hints of big changes that are going to take place in our society and our policy. We talked about unemployment support and employment resilience, right? We talked about sustainability transformation for the economy. We also talked about investing in social mobility, for example, restructuring wages to help low-income workers. So all of these things are going to happen over the next couple of years, but you know, this budget is not going to do everything. It's more like, I think, a down payment on many of these plans which will be realized in the future.
Okay, right. Okay, so we've set the foundation and so on, right? So, but maybe, you know, looking at all this, perhaps I'd like to start with businesses and their capabilities. How are we being prepared for the future? And maybe cost. Cost has always been a big issue. We always talk about cost. Definitely, I think government listened to the enterprises. We've had this enterprise support package. We've got a bit of this corporate tax rebate. I think on the flip side, there's going to be increasing costs because we've got that local qualifying salary. That's going to
be local qualifying salary. Yes.
Yes, that's going to go up. I think the seniors they will be also seeing this higher CPF contribution rate. So that will all add to cost. So I mean, what do you say to that?
Well, I think on one hand there's government relief, right, for costs, but on the other hand you can see some of these move. The 14% increase of the local qualifying salary from 1,400 to 1,600, the increase in the CPF contribution rate for workers aged 55 to 65 from 1st January. But I think these are necessary moves. I think, as DPM Wong has said, we should not be apologetic for growth, but it should not be growth at all costs. I think we need to continue to look after the vulnerable segment of our population, the lower wage workers as well as the seniors. The question is, where is the fair share of that burden of the increasing costs? And we should note that in this budget, you know, DPM Wong has announced a couple of measures to help employers defray some of these costs. Okay. This includes a $1 billion top-up of the Progressive Wage Credit Scheme. Yes. It includes an increase of the Progressive Wage Credit Scheme wage ceiling to $3,000 and an increase of the co-funding from 30 to 50%. For the CPF, I think there's also an announcement of a CPF transitional scheme to again mitigate the costs. So if you ask for SMEs, I think certainly more help is will be welcome. But I think longer term, I think the sort of help that we should give companies is not just in terms of supporting their wage costs, but look at real changes for both the employers and employees to improve productivities. Because we all know, right, the only way for sustained wage increase is through productivity gains. And I think that ought to be the kind of focus. Yeah. Other than business costs for salary, I think one area that's not addressed is rental costs. I think that is something that's still of concern. We know that the government is not a major player in that, but certainly for industrial rents and perhaps rents in government office buildings, if there can be some rental freeze, I think that would certainly be welcome.
Okay. Alvin, what do you think about the cost? In other words, given all this, are the SMEs better off?
I think, to be fair, I agree with a lot with my fellow panelists here, and cost is always going to be an issue. If you look at how Singapore has evolved, right, I will have to look at it in the state that it's impossible for Singapore to go back to where we were, to be like 10, 20 years ago. Going forward, we are still going to be a very costly place to operate in for a lot of businesses. So our way out of this is we really have to look at productivity, efficiency. And if you look at the longer term measures that they will put in place to discover the new next AI breakthrough, things like that, it's all working towards that direction, trying to improve on productivity, trying to improve on efficiency to move us up to the next level. Because if you're trying to go back to where we were 10, 20 years ago, where the cost was lower, right, I'm afraid that's not going to happen for us. So we will have to proceed on as a high value but high cost production, service oriented kind of economy going forward. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, I agree that in the long term, companies need to build their capabilities. So I think one of the things that struck me in the budget was the 3 billion to the research, innovation and enterprise, that 2025, and then there's another 1 billion to catalyze AI activities. I think that one's quite interesting.
Not just to catalyze, if you read, it includes expanding our national broadband infrastructure,
Correct.
to 10 gigabit per second. Although I'm still scratching my head, what sort of content requires 10 gigabit per second? But we let the technologies and the business figure it out. But I think this investment ahead of our infrastructure would be critical.
Okay, so you think that it's quite significant on the AI front, Walter?
Yeah, when I hear all of this discussion and hype about AI, I think the real challenge here is how do you integrate AI usefully into business processes? How do you get the return on investment on it? And I think there's a lot of concern at this stage that a lot of these early users of AI may not actually, when you look at it, when the dust settles, may not actually give you that ROI. And I think that's where we actually have to come in with these investments. So just to give you one example, this came up in the news just recently. There was this case of, I think, company Air Canada deploying AI in its chatbot, and the chatbot went rogue. It basically made up a refund policy that didn't exist, but basically an unhappy customer sued for it, and the court agreed that Air Canada was bound by what its AI agent said incorrectly in order to pay out according to that policy. And this just goes to show that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I think that's where the investment comes in, to actually operationalize AI at the business level in a way that makes sense. And I think Singapore, if we can get in early on this, if we can maybe invest in the building blocks for this, maybe become a regional center for, training of these chatbots or other AI applications, development of that, I think that's where that may actually pay dividends. But it's not going to come from just, telling companies just integrate AI and then let the companies do what they want, because I don't think that gets you the results.
I agree with that, which is why I think if you look at the initial announcement of that 1 billion, I think kudos to the government. A billion is to secure high computing technology, working with companies to set up all these AI center of excellence. I think this is all well and good. But how can we ensure that some of these actually trickle down to some of our companies?
Yes.
How can we get AI to be more diffuse in the bulk base of our companies? Some of the things that Prof. Walter talked about, it is not just applicable for big companies like Air Canada. Today, AI can already be used to improve customer service, improve marketing, make the people who are doing marketing write their emails better and all this. So these are really here and now. But are SMEs using it? No. I think they're just not equipped. Sometimes it's not the cost. I think Prof. Walter would agree. It's actually the lack of management expertise and the technical expertise to do that. So how can we ensure that we have something that's diffuse? So maybe some parts of that billion can be used for AI diffusion grant to really help SMEs to address the here and now. I think that'll be great.
How to use it, right?
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So maybe a bit on, we are talking about competitiveness and all that, but maybe I wanted to bring in Irene at this point because, we're improving our competitiveness, but at the same time, we've got that longer challenge from that BEPS. I won't say it, the law. So 2.0 initiative, and I think that, limits our capacity. We've been offering attractive tax incentives, and now that limits our capacity to do so. So that refundable investment credit, that sounds very good, a great idea. Irene, I mean, that's going to really help our companies?
Yeah, so indeed, with the Pillar 2 top-up taxes, you can imagine that large companies will all be paying a minimum effective tax rate of 15% across the board. So just for example, if you're a company operating in Singapore, even if our government gives a tax incentive, which offers a tax rate of, say, 5%, that company's effective tax rate for Pillar 2 purposes will still be 15%. You have a top-up of 10%. So that basically negates the benefits of the traditional tax incentives that Singapore has always been offering. But with the refundable investment credit, I'll call it RIC, that helps to manage the impact a little bit, in that it's just like a traditional tax incentive that offers reduced tax rate. With the RIC, it also reduces a company's tax payable, but its impact in reducing the effective tax rate for Pillar 2 purposes, it's a little bit lesser. So that gives you a little bit less in terms of the top-up tax. So from that front, I think it's really useful. And I'll also add that actually this RIC came out of a lot of business consultations that the government has been having with the business community. So this is something that the business community has been asking for. And I think overseas places like UK and all that, they have also started this. And it's also what we call aligned with the Pillar 2 rules and regulations. So I would say overall, this is an additional tool for Singapore to attract companies to continue to use Singapore as a base. But I think with this, as a company, I would encourage everyone to look at how these all interact and come together. How do you make good use of current grants, cash grants, RIC, together with the existing tax incentive benefits, to see how you can make the most and make it work for your investment based on the company's profile.
But it definitely sounds more complicated. Sorry, Ping Soon.
It is more complicated, so I can't master all the details. But I just want to make 2 points that I think the introduction of the RIC and implementation of BEPS, I suppose it's just about bringing us parity to many of the jurisdictions.
Yes.
Right, so the tax incentive is no longer, or can no longer be, the reasons for companies to set up here.
Yes.
Which then goes back to the point I think Alvin mentioned earlier,
yes,
on what ought to be the sources of Singapore's competitive advantage. It got to rest back, on our strong connectivity, our good infrastructure, our talent, our live environment, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Tax incentive is no longer going to be the one that makes a difference.
And we can't compete that much on cost, right? Because our cost base
is higher. So if you look at the budget, again going back to the budget itself, you can see that based on the kind of measures and there was announced, there are some sectors that are specifically kind of targeted. Of course, the technology side is one, the AI that is mentioned itself. Then of course, at the end of it, you do see that financial sector is also being given the top up for the fund itself to develop the financial sector. And of course, sustainable practices, the transition to net zero, those are areas that we can see that where the government focus is quite clearly in terms of in terms of their outlook itself, the sectors that they want to I would say grow or to put bets on, that there will be for Singapore to grow to the next leap itself. And I think in essence, I think I will agree that these are the areas that should focus on, because if you look at when you have your amount of chips on hand, right, it's limited, right? You can't be spreading it out so thinly to every single sector. But at the same time, right, we have to really pick the winners, right? We have to pick the sectors that there is that potential to bring us to the next step, and it also help us as an economy itself. A lot of the things of green transitions that we talk about, right, is something that is also inevitable. So might as well make use of it and help us grow the next leap.
I see. So, okay. Sustainability is one of the things that we want to talk about. It's a challenge though. I mean, to me, it's going to cost, right? It will cost businesses. I think there's some grants and so on. So maybe Irene, you can talk a bit about that. But I'm not sure whether, we'll be able to meet these targets in time. I mean, countries overseas have also said that they're not going to meet targets. They, for example, they're going to maybe defer them. So do you think the budget maybe, even though there's help, has done enough to prepare us for this sustainability challenge?
I think it's a good start, certainly more to be done. And I think there is this energy efficiency grant that just helps SMEs and all that to make the first step towards using less energy, invest in energy efficient equipment. Hopefully that everyone understands. You use less energy, it costs less to run your business. And that hopefully gives you a structural change in your energy cost, in that it's lower, to kind of cushion the higher cost. I think that's sort of the start of it. And overall, from a sustainability perspective, I think if every business encouraged to start taking sustainability into their business strategy, that could give them longer term growth. But at the same time, I think Singapore is also trying to develop itself into a sustainability hub. So beyond just making sure everyone is on board, there's also this opportunity for Singapore to become a regional hub for sustainability and attracting foreign capabilities, helping to grow the local capabilities in the whole sustainability ecosystem, so-called. And I feel that gives Singaporean a new set of diverse opportunities for new career paths, for example. Like we now have a talent crunch, we need people in that, and those are the new jobs that's really being created from that sustainability drive.
Okay, Ota, would you want to chip in?
Yeah, I think the big challenge with sustainability is the politics of it, because a lot of sustainability policies, they impose short-term costs on the economy and society, even though they're good for us in the long run, and these costs are very unevenly distributed. Give you one example. One of the challenges to sustainability policy in the EU today is actually protests by farmers. Now you would think, why farmers? Why are they at the forefront? But actually some of the tweaks done, like for example removing tax breaks for diesel and so on, it turns out farmers are big users of diesel, of course, so they find themselves on the forefront protesting these sustainability policies. So if we don't get the politics right, I think it'll be very challenging. In Singapore, for example, if you look at what is the impact of the carbon tax going to be, I think a National Climate Change Secretariat, they have said that they've calculated the 2024 carbon tax increase could result in maybe about a 4% increase in household electricity bills, right? And when you think about it, it doesn't sound like a huge amount, but it could easily become politicized. People could easily feel that it is a much larger hike than 4%, just like what we saw with GST. 1%, but people say, no, it's much more than 1% at the end to me. And I think that's why we have to get ahead of that curve. And at least for utility bills, we did see an increase in usage rebates and things like that. So I think it's moderating the impact of sustainability policies with measures to lower the brunt, on households and SMEs and so on. I think that's going to be important.
I suppose I'm glad that at least green is not politicized over here. Yeah. I think as far as the businesses is concerned, when we did a survey last year, over 7 in 10 businesses say that they're aligned with the green plan. They want to do it. But yet in the same survey, 4 in 10 say they don't know where to start, and cost is an issue. So I think what Irene mentioned earlier, the expansion of the energy efficient grant to cover more sectors, I think will help. Greater adoption of these solutions will help lower the cost. But I think it's important to point out one thing. The key now is really implementation. Right, yes. And then the challenge here is that not all energy efficient grant measures are as straightforward as like changing a light bulb. Changing a light bulb anybody can do, right? But it comes to implementing some of these energy efficiency equipment. It requires pretty complex changes in your business processes, in your production processes, and therein lies the challenge, right? For the SMEs who are driving sustainability in their company. You like it or you don't like it, and a lot of time the sustainability driven is from a reporting point of view, yes. And it's actually the finance person that is doing that. Yes. Does the finance person really understand the business process that's needed? Probably not. So there's a dearth of this expertise that SMEs can tap to. Government is giving a grant, but if you look more closely, the grant is to cover the cost of the equipment. But it's not just equipment that is needed. That is the full end of the implementation, right? From the early consultancy, the look at the business processes. Okay. Yep, you pay for the equipment, and thereafter the implementation and the training. So really, if you really want to bring the SMEs on board for energy efficiency, you really need to look at the full value chain. But at the same time, because there's a dearth of expertise, I can't imagine every SME has the resources, nor are there availability of talent for sustainability professional. So how can the whole ecosystem kind of work together to pull together this pool of resources and maybe offer it as a service, to many of the SMEs? I think that will really start to change the game.
That's right. And one of the things that I do see also in the budget of everybody was the Future Energy, I think, fund.
Future Energy Fund, $5 billion.
Yes, I think this is definitely something that is very forward-looking, but it's also necessary, because I think the measures that were the proposals that were mentioned inside is not something that you will see the private sector being able to take it up and to do it. So the government is taking that step, which is, I think, is the right, because these are significant investments, and it may take a lot more to really develop those. I mean, those mentioned inside about hydrogen, nuclear. Yeah, I mean, it's put on the table. That means there is a careful thought into this whole process. The whole ball has started to roll for these areas, but I think this is something that is a space that we will have to watch, but it's definitely very important.
But I think that's very important, keeping in mind that 40% of our carbon emission is from our power generators. So I think getting that equation right would make sure that companies who are located in Singapore are not carbon disadvantaged.
Correct.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. So we've got that big picture, but maybe I wanted to pick up on a point that you had made about the SMEs and the schemes, because I think there's definitely quite a lot of help for SMEs. There's always been help all over the years, and yet somehow I view that these SMEs do not totally max out the schemes. Perhaps they always say they don't know, even though there is also help. Actually, there is help, I think, by some of the consultants, but somehow the SMEs can't nail it. So what do you think is how could we actually solve some of that problem? They have help, but how do they tap on that help and really max it out?
Well, I think there are SMEs and there are SMEs, right? I suppose for those SMEs that really need help, can they go to the SME centers that's being set up and all that? I think yes, I think those help are available. But I think there's something else that the government agencies can do. You just take the Skills Future Enterprise Credit Scheme that was extended, right? If you look at the annexes, there are 18 qualifying programs from 13 agencies.
Right.
So I think I would encourage government agencies to not look at some of this support, from a very agency-specific, scheme-specific, but look at it from the business-centric perspective and help to improve the accessibility of this. But it's not just accessibility. At the end, we should ask ourselves the utilization of these schemes. And the utilization of these schemes is such that, we got to overcome some of the processing issues, some of the reimbursement issues. We've gotten feedback from companies that, just looking at a number of forms to fill up is just a deterrence. Big companies, you can probably afford to have one or two person, maybe full-time job, to look through all the government schemes to optimize the amount of grant you can. But for SME Tauke, which has to run the operations, it's just not possible. And just crossing that hurdle itself, would be a challenge itself. So let's see what we can do to work with government agencies to simplify the process and perhaps make the payment sooner so that it can address some of their cash flow issues.
Yeah, this is what we hear from some of our clients as well. I mean, if you're a big company, you have enough resources, you can deal with this. But if you're really small and manpower is really an issue tight, right, then it really makes it very difficult to try to squeeze out the extra mileage from that, right? But it comes at the extreme cost if you're very small. So, but there's also the point that if there are companies that, as your colleague told me, Mark, he says that if companies that are already using it and they're using it efficiently, right, then there will be some companies that are still not using much of it. But extending it itself, right, does not benefit those companies who are fully utilizing it. So maybe they could have not just an extension, they maybe have to think about topping it up as well. So those companies who are fully utilizing it, right, there is additional headroom for them to proceed on with this area.
Okay. So quite a few things that we can look at. Do you think there's anything that in the budget that we could have had? I don't know. We used to talk quite a lot about internationalization in the past, but I don't see that much, but maybe that there is the focus on costs. So I'm not sure, was there anything in the budget for the companies that you would have liked to see and you didn't?
Well, you touched on one of them. I think in our budget recommendations, we say that other than addressing the here and now costs, there are 3 areas that we hope government can support. One is digitalization, so we talk a bit about that. The other one is decarbonization. We also talk a bit about that. So the third is really internationalization. There's not much in today's this budget, and there's some extension of trade credit. But I will call out, to say that, precisely because the world is so uncertain now, because of economic fragmentation, I think we should do more to help our companies explore opportunities overseas. The reality is that other than Singapore, the rest of the economies, challenging as it may be, are growing much faster. You just look at ASEAN, 680 million people, 60% middle class, 35%, I mean the numbers, they are having a demographic dividend. We are having a demographic deficit. So the opportunities are there.
Yeah, we should tap on that.
We should tap on that, so how can we do better in terms of perhaps, so we make a specific proposal to increase the market readiness grant to allow companies to make use of that to explore more markets. We ask the government to even consider a cost to support Singaporeans to post overseas. Right? It's not just to support the company's operations. Another big agenda that we would like government to do more of is to find ways to support Singaporeans to pick up the necessary regional expertise so that they can take on global leadership too. So I think more could be done in that area as well.
Definitely, this is definitely a key area because, as you rightly pointed out, the market here is limited in the size, and internationalization, perhaps not going that far, but we look at our neighborhood, right?
Not Africa.
It is already
it's a fantastic market.
Fantastic market, and a lot of the companies, I believe here, when they have moved up a certain bracket, right, they may have started as a small SME. They are ready to take that next leap, and with more government help, definitely, right, in terms of that area, right, to bring them out and to let them through the processes, because often a lot of this going outside of Singapore, right, is about the rules and regulations in those places, about jurisdictions, and in that sense, I think the government would definitely have a good role to play in trying to bring the resources together, because if you are just operating like trying to help one single company, perhaps it doesn't really make sense. But if everybody is grouped together, right, then there's cost efficiencies that will be reaped by helping a lot of people, a lot of the companies going out.
But I want to make a plug for UOB here, right? And I think one thing that I read in the budget announcement, which I'm quite cheered, is that government is enhancing what they call PAC. Again, don't ask me what exactly it stands for, but essentially it's a scheme to kind of, it's a scheme, but it's actually to crowd in, to get big companies to help small companies, and they have expanded to cover not just supplier base, but to corporate venturing and internationalization. I think the details we don't know, but I'm encouraged, because we should not just look at the government to help the SMEs to go overseas. If you can work with big companies, the PwC, the UOBs, to work together with them.
They have the resources.
Exactly, to help our companies go overseas. I think that would be a win-win situation. So let's not just look to the government, but perhaps look to the bigger companies in our ecosystem with resources and alignment of interest to bring our companies international.
We have to work together.
I think everybody works together in that sense.
Okay. We've talked quite a bit about the companies. Maybe we can talk a bit about workers, because all companies will need good workers. I think,
unless they are replaced by AI.
Yes, that's right. Yes. So maybe one announcement that we can follow up on, I think, the big one, the Skills Future Level Up program, had the Skills Future credit, with courses and subsidies and so on. Maybe Walter could speak, you could speak first on it. It's pretty significant.
Yeah, so I think even before this announcement in this year's budget, the Skills Future movement had already been putting a lot of money towards training for mid-career workers. I mean, some people were not aware, for example, that there was this ongoing Skills Future mid-career subsidy, provided up to 90% subsidy for eligible courses for, at our AUs, our polytechnics, our ITEs. But the issue is, I think, even though these things exist, a lot of people don't know about them. The signature, for skills training, maybe it's just not that high at the moment. So it's not just a money issue. I think it's about how do you design a skills training program that matches what workers want and need, also, looks at what educational institutions are capable of offering. And finally, of course, you have to look at the enterprises. Are you offering what the businesses actually need as well? It's a three-way match, right, between workers, educators, as well as businesses. And I think what the budget has done is it's actually signaled much more clearly that this idea of mid-career training, career switching, reskilling is something that should be normalized. And why I say normalized is that maybe in the past, we would think, okay, somebody has to stay in one job, one career all the way to the end. If they have to leave it halfway, this is not a good thing. Maybe people are considered in the past failures if they do that. But we have to get away from that mindset, right? We have to go to a mindset where I think everybody has to proactively think about this idea. Maybe at a certain point, I will have done everything I want to do in this particular line of work. Maybe I want to change something else. Or maybe I'm seeing that my job and my industry is headed for some difficult times, so I want to do something proactively, right, and get out of it while I still can. And I think once we normalize that, then I think that's the spirit, I think, of this Skills Future initiative in the future, normalizing the idea of doing a mid-career, skills retraining, job switch, career switch, whatever it is. But to get there, we have to do the matching between the workers, the educators, and the businesses. And I think that is the real challenge. It's not just a money issue, it's about, putting a lot of work in to match everything up nicely.
As you say, right, there's been quite a lot of funds already set aside, and yet we are not really seeing that much take up.
Yeah.
So again, we always move back to the points of utilization, take up. The schemes are available, and yet some of that is not happening.
But for the workplace training, I think there are real challenges. When we ask companies, right, why are you supportive of training? They say, yeah, of course. But you go down to the next level. When the economy is operating in such a lean manner, I think a lot of times they say that if I send my worker for training, especially long courses training, who's going to backfill, right? And then after they go back to training, they say the training doesn't seem very practical. So we applaud the government in stepping out on the Skills Future, really, But for the long form courses, I know there are certain schemes, right, to allow people above 40 years old to go back to school. I think 2 points. Right? One is really, it's great that we are giving opportunities for above 40 to have a second bite of the cherry, but the type of cherry got to be different, right? The cost, the modality, and all that, they got to be different from the kind of cherries that people half their age are doing, right? So that's one. The second one is I agree with Prof, right, that it is really a kind of a tripartite between the employers, the companies, and the government. I think we've got to find a way to close the gap, right, between the employers' needs as well as the universities. How can we even make workplace an extension of the IHLs, Institute of Higher Learning? How can we get the faculty to see themselves as part of a training and development department of a big company? Right, that see actually it is between them. So rather than long form training, can we have more on the job kind of training that is actually recognized, certifiable, right, that can allow portability of the skills across the company. I think a lot more needs to be done, otherwise we are not going to get a benefit from that. Which is why I think, rather than just an extension of the Skills Future Enterprise Credit, which is $10,000 for company, there was an earlier point by Alvin, for companies that fully utilize it, can we give them more? Because what you really want to see is more of these training done by the SMEs.
And the other side of the coin, which is the same thing, I talked a bit about just before we went on air, right?
Yes.
It's about the employer's mindset.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's all good that this, the increase, the quantum itself for that, the upskilling for the mid-career people. But then at the end of the day, we also need the company's mindset or the employer's mindset to be able to make this work. I think often you do hear that there's whether whether the relevance of the training itself to the current company itself, but to the current company and to the current role. But there's also the greater fear that within there is some concerns when the employee goes for this training itself, the company shouldn't be fearful whether they will lose the employee as a result of his better skills. I think there would be it can't be all addressed in one budget, but maybe in the future budgets, right, there could be incentives or adjustments on the employer side, right, to make it encourage them to be able to accept the changing realities for their employees, that they should be looking forward to further careers beyond just sticking to their current job. And if they could make themselves more useful to company in different roles, maybe with a better enhanced skill set. But currently there might be still, I think there's concerns that some companies or employers may be concerned that if they do the change, the upskilling itself, right? They may lose
they may not benefit from it
yeah,
because
they may,
of people moving.
people moving. And yet at the same time, we are in this budget talking about increasing the mobility of the people itself, the upward mobility. So there is some contradictions in the, I think, in that sense of the externalities, I put it, of having such a program. To the cost itself and the benefit to the company needs to somewhat be aligned so that they can better be matched with upskilling for the employees itself.
But that's where I think we've got to find ways to address the externalities that you mentioned, you know, that if everybody does it, if every employer does that, then there's less worry because they know that somewhere else,
the employee will be trained somewhere else, right?
And they'll
so
get
the question is, you know, what sort of incentive system can you put there? And I would say in this day and age when employment market is so tight, you know, I think a company that invests in the training may well be an employee value proposition, right? So how can then government accentuate the effect? By having some ways to recognize companies that does that. And then the companies who are not investing, they are not going to get the workers anyway because they know that, hey, this company doesn't invest in my training, so why do I join? Then hopefully they'll say, hey, I also better, you know, yes, the people may move, but if everybody do their part, I'm going to get a worker that's a bit more trained as well. So perhaps that's one way to find a way to address the externalities that Alvin mentioned.
Yeah.
So really we need to do more maybe on the company front because we've already got the grants and so on for our employees and hopefully they will take them up. But it's whether on the company side how we can extend that. I mean, even have the courses that they want, I mean, that are relevant to the company as well. Okay, so maybe a bit related to that, there was this hint of the unemployment benefit, which was kind of parked under the Skills Future scheme. So I'm just wondering, what do you all make of it? I mean, certainly it will happen, but the details were not released in the budget. So, but it will, I suppose, complement the existing, what we have. Ping Soon, what do you think?
Prof, you want to talk
maybe
about
Prof.
it first?
Yeah, so I think on the unemployment benefit side, right, I think the challenge has always been how do you balance the need to protect the Singaporean workers and their families against, you know, these kinds of economic shocks, right, versus how do you maintain the dynamism of the economy, how do you ensure that, you know, people are not incentivized, for example, to leave their jobs unnecessarily or to spend too long unemployed and so on. How do you balance these factors? And I think the way to kind of square this problem is to recognize that basically it's not a bad thing if people are unemployed if they do so proactively in the sense of leaving jobs or industries which are sunset or problematic, whatever, so that they can find you know, jobs or opportunities which match their skill sets and inclinations a lot better. I think that's really the key here. And that's why I think we already see some hints of supporting Singaporeans through this kind of transition, not so much through the unemployment benefits package because the details have to be announced, but through this idea of, for example, providing a training allowance for mid-career workers who are seeking full-time retraining, right? So there was this concept that was discussed in the budget of up to $3,000, up to 50% of your past salary for up to 24 months if you're pursuing full-time training. And I think that's very important because then for the PMETs, it actually alleviates a lot of their concerns that, you know, they can't support their families during a period of retraining. And I think it may be useful in the sense of getting people to think about retraining earlier rather than waiting to be pushed. Because today, a lot of people, I think, are going to wait to be pushed, right? They're going to wait to lose their job due to retrenchment. You know, they're going to wait for the industry to clearly exit Singapore, and by then it might be too late. People might be too much at the sunset stage of their career to really benefit strongly from retraining. So, you know, coming back to unemployment insurance and resilience and so on, I think it would be important to design this program so that, yes, of course, you want to pay when people are involuntarily unemployed. You don't want people to leave a good job anyhow, right? But at the same time, I think it's very important to have some provisions in there to accommodate people in industries or job sectors which are on the decline anyway, and where we actually want people to get out while they still can and, you know, proactively retrain and adapt themselves to a new career.
I think
The fact that the details have not been announced shows that it is not an easy balance, I think, for the government.
Yes.
Where is that Goldilocks spot, right? You know,
Yes.
where you provide enough support for the involuntary unemployed, but don't blunt the personal incentive for you to
Yes.
have self-help. I
That's
think we
right.
all know that where the government stands on many of these issues. You
Yes.
don't want to go down the slope, you know, where you are actually better off just relying on the unemployment benefits than actually getting a job. So I think the fact that the details are not out means it's not easy to find that balance. But I think it is a move in the right direction because I do subscribe to the view that, you know, many of the involuntary unemployed may sometimes, you know, jump onto the next opportunity very quickly. And maybe that opportunity may be very convenient because there are certain jobs which only Singaporeans can do, but it may not necessarily be a growth sector. So having this in place will perhaps allow the involuntary unemployed to kind of take a breath and say, okay, you know, maybe it may not. I mean, you don't need to be a Grab driver. You don't need to. You know, you can actually pick up certain skills, and so that you are able to then move to the other sector. So I think that's the important thing that we do.
And I think there's also an important point in this as well, right? About jumping into a next opportunity because there's no other support available, right? Is that a lot of this, especially if you're thinking there are PMETs, right? They have a core skill that is very much in. It can be repurposed, right, into another industry that needs those core skills on top of it. So what they are short of is probably like, I mean, I could see examples like there are some parts of electronics, right? We have a lot of electronics here, but then there are some parts of the industry, right, is on a decline. A good example is 10 years ago, 20 years ago, hard disk drives.
Yes.
That is one sector that went. But then there are those people within it, right, that had a core skills, right, that could be transferred to another industry that is right now thriving, but they need to learn some new skills to make them do that transition. For example, like I think pharmaceuticals, they need some. If you are like doing logistics in, let's say, electronics, right, you can transit into this, but you may need some time to learn more about the industry. And I think with all this in place, right, they can get that transition and without losing that core skills that this person had developed over, let's say, 15, 20 years in that industry itself. So it also helps the economy as a whole to try to preserve those core skills, repurpose them into an industry that is growing, rather than to lose it all when he jumps in to do a job that he can only find just to make sure that he makes and meets. So that is that.
I think that's very important, right? I think we focus so much on technical skills, rightly or wrongly. I think, you know, and as employers, you should verify, right, that I suppose a lot of employers still favor managerial skills over technical skills, right? You know, there's all this debate about this, you know. So we got to make sure that those hardcore skills that's being preserved over many years of IT education, diploma education, and all that is not lost because of industry disruption. That they move to something that doesn't require the technical skills. I'm not saying managerial skills is not important, it's of course important, but you know, how can we have equal? Right, that a very technically skilled person can earn as much as a managerial. That your progression up your career ladder is not based on the number of people you manage, you know, just on management, but on hard skills. Look at other economies like Germany and all that. So I think we need to do that, and I think having some of these schemes is a way to help preserve, to tell people who are in certain of these technical skills that don't worry, you can continue to focus it, take a breath, maybe pivot. You know.
Pivot, repurpose it to
look
a
at all the
different
green
industry.
jobs. We're going to have a lot more electric vehicles. The repair of electric vehicles will be very different, right? So could some of these skills be transferable, for example?
Yeah, I think the messaging of this unemployment benefit to their points is very important. It's not for you to remain unemployed. It's something to support you to help yourself get re-employed in something else.
I mean, I feel that actually it's a lot of mindset changes. Right? It's a long-term change. We have many parties who are all the stakeholders are all involved. We are getting there, but I think it'll probably take some time. On that unemployment, maybe I could also just ask the question, you know, we've always been talking about us being a bit more progressive, right? So this budget, I suppose, maybe saw a bit more, you know, on that progressivity, but maybe, not so much on the tax changes. I mean, maybe I could get the comments from, say, Prof.
Sure.
On how this
Yeah, so I think on progressivity, it's true that this particular budget we didn't see any major changes on that, at least for households. In fact, for firms and households, we saw a bit of a give back, right, in terms of, for example, the rebates as well as the adjustments to property tax and so on that were announced. But I think in the longer run, we are very much moving towards progressivity because of a couple of, I think, global trends. One global trend obviously is BEPS 2.0, right? The whole point of that is to stop this feature of economies racing to the bottom in terms of offering tax breaks to companies to cite themselves in low tax jurisdictions. So I think it's a good thing that globally we have agreed on this so that we can actually recover more of corporate profits into our tax bases in any country in the world. But I think related to this, there's also this wider, I think, global movement as well towards looking at taxing the incomes or the wealth of the very, very, very elite, right? And this is something that if there is a global movement on this, then indeed I think in Singapore we would expect to see some moves as well. It's just that right now, of course, we're not going to do anything about it because as long as there's no global consensus, it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to actually introduce taxes in this area and drive away, for example, the high net worths, the individuals and so on who are considering Singapore. I think the challenge with this progressivity issue is actually targeting and calibration. And DPM talked about this as much, right? When he talked about the increases to property tax, which were, which kicked in last year, right? Or rather kicking in this year, because he acknowledged that originally the property tax was calibrated to only hit maybe about the top 7% or so, and then it inadvertently hit about 13 to 14%, right? Because what happened was rents really spiked, annual value spiked up. A lot of people were caught by the property tax increase, which were not intended to be so. And I think when we move towards progressivity, it's this calibration that is really important, because I think society, accepts that the well-off have to pay a bit more, do more of their share. But then when you start implementing it, everybody suddenly starts saying, wait a minute, I'm not well-off, or I thought I wasn't so well, why are you asking me to pay more? So I think it's calibration, and I think having a broad social consensus, that this is something we ought to do. And making sure, of course, we catch in this the true high net worth and so on to some extent as well.
Yeah, that's right.
I think there's nothing wrong. I totally support Prof, right? I think there's nothing wrong for a society as we mature to be more progressive and take care of the socially vulnerable and so on and so forth. The question, of course, is fiscal sustainability.
Yes.
I mean, I've lost track, the amount of CDC vouchers that's been given out is almost like a permanent feature of the budget now.
Almost.
It's not. It was $600 and then there's another $600.
It is not permanent. It is always announced as a one-off.
It's a one-off.
And then there will be a top-up to the fund to ensure that it is funded, but then it's not made to be a permanent feature. I
understand, but easy to give. Whenever you don't give, I think the population will say, where's the CDC voucher? I think
which is that's a good point.
Which will be an issue in terms of sustainability.
But I'll go back to the point, right? And I need to say that I think eventually the sustainability from a fiscal envelope will have to go back to whether the economy can grow. And yes, DPM has announced and shared that the long-term or mid-term economic growth target is 2 to 3%. Right? And yes, we should focus on innovation, on productivity. But Prof would correct me, right? I mean, a very simple equation for economic growth. Economic growth is equal to productivity growth plus labor growth. And we know how well or not well we are doing for labor growth. Imagine a very mature economy like Singapore trying to get 2 to 3% all from productivity growth, very challenging. So then the question is that if we cannot increase labor growth through immigration and through the more dragon year babies, then where else but allow foreign workers to come in? And herein lies, I think, the challenge that we have to navigate. How can we optimize the foreign worker quota that's given? How can we allow maybe more, I suppose, a portability of foreigners across different parts, and start to increase societal acceptance that perhaps there are some areas that we do need to live with more foreign workers in Singapore. We don't get that right, I don't think we can get a 2 to 3% economic growth.
Okay. We may have more babies SG60. It's
hope so.
That'll be next year. But I don't know, on the topic of foreign workers, I don't know, Prof, maybe you want to comment?
Yeah, so I think for foreign workers, It's really a multi-dimensional problem, right? I think on the lower skill or lower wage end, I think Singaporeans generally support the idea that we do need a significant number of foreign workers to actually provide services, construction, things like that. It's more of, you might say, the disamenities of that people are concerned with. To what extent are people willing to have them, working and living side by side with us? I think that's the issue. With the higher skill foreign workers, of course, the main concern there is actually displacement, right? The concern that basically they're taking jobs that Singaporeans value and want. I think what I will say here is I think we should be looking to some initiatives outside of budget, such as this idea of a special economic zone with, Southern Malaysia. I think that's really going to be key here, because the fact is, without having, this, you might say, expanded hinterland or this area there, where you've got access to a lot more land, a lot more availability of labor and so on, this really forces us to put everything onshore in Singapore, which doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think we can have the best of both worlds if we can integrate economically to a much greater extent with Southern Malaysia, where basically that takes off, I think, a lot of the pressure for some of the manpower and so on in Singapore. And I think this will be good for both us and the Malaysians. That's why we should pursue it very seriously. So that may be something outside budget, which if it comes to fruition, can help, serve as a bit of a relief valve on this manpower issue.
We totally agree with what Prof has just said, because this itself, right, opens us to a lot more opportunities that have been our constraints. I think if we look at it in Singapore, one of the key constraints is definitely land. Then the other one, quite like what we have discussed, labor force. And if we can do this with our partners in Malaysia itself, right, this will open a big opportunity. It's not just, it will benefit not just us, but the region as well, the places where, and it will bring in a lot more. Once we get it together as an activity, you can imagine more, it enhances connectivity. It puts us importantly onto the chain where we are part of that supply chain together with our partnering countries, be it with Indonesia, be it Malaysia, and it will help the region itself. And we all stand to benefit, and we will all can grow our own economies and our own our households, the living standards will all continue to be lifted up in that manner. It's just by a matter of cooperation in this kind of projects.
I agree, but I just wanted to put a point there that the whole narrative of working with Johor and all that should not be one about Singapore displacing things that we don't want to that. I think it's really about working together that we can then compete for new investments that benefit both Singapore and our partners. I think that's important. Nobody wants to be a backwater of another country. So I think it's important we focus on creating new opportunities rather than seeing as a displacements of constraints of things that we cannot do in Singapore.
Yes, definitely. That should be the right spirit of this. And I believe that the Economic Development Board, they are quite focused on how to proceed on from this. And I think this is a great opportunity for everyone.
I think so.
It should be seen as a win-win situation. And not
the high-speed railway and
with
so
a better
on,
connectivity, with a larger, it provides a whole enlarged economic space for both.
Yes.
So, okay, this is quite an optimistic note. As we are wrapping up, maybe I could just get your final thoughts on maybe what needs to be done, what you like, and then maybe what you would like to see in this year and in the next. Prof?
Sure. Yeah, so I think the budget laid forth very broad plans in place, right? And we don't know yet, I think, how these plans are actually going to be implemented. And I think that's what we're going to see actually the rest of the year. In particular, I think what I'd like to see over the next couple of months is more details on what's going to be done, I think, in this whole unemployment support and retraining issue, right? What kinds of support are workers going to get? How is the government going to actually work with, the workers, the businesses, the educational institutions to really integrate jobs and skills training? That's, I think, one important area I'd like more details on. I think the other thing that was also talked about, and we didn't get much chance to talk about it today, is this whole idea of rebalancing, I think, the wage structure, especially to accommodate higher wages for Singaporeans who have less educational, formal educational qualifications, or the Singaporeans who are working more, for example, with their hands and skills, or more in the hard sectors, the touch sectors, and so on, right? It's about, DPM talked extensively beautifully in the budget about how they need to be recognized, but what does that mean in practice, right? What are we going to do in practice to uplift their wages? And there I wonder whether we could even have such a thing, for example, as a progressive wage model for certain kinds of jobs in these sectors to actually make it more concrete how we're going to uplift their wages. We already have hints of that, in fact, for certain technical jobs. For example, if you talk about technicians in the public transport industry, yes, there's a career ladder, there's what looks like, a wage ladder and so on for them, but can we expand this concept further so that we cover more Singaporeans in these jobs? Because it is not just about upskilling, right? Upskilling, of course, is important, but we don't want to say that the only way to have a job where you can feed your families and so on with it is you got to get the diploma degree or whatever. It also has to be about, I think, respecting all the Singaporeans across the spectrum and making sure they've got viable pathways, to basically maximize their own potential. So I think this is something we hope to see, I hope to see later in this year.
Okay, we'll need another roundtable for that. Okay. Irene.
Yeah, maybe I will end on a lighter note. I recall Minister saying that resilience comes from solidarity, and solidarity comes from shared community experiences. And I'm really hoping to see that some of these measures not just creates that solidarity amongst the people in the neighborhoods and the community, but also between multinationals, local enterprises, and our labor force. Hopefully that all comes together, and what I would call more a lifting of that kampong spirit that we always had, and a rekindle of that. I want to see more of that coming.
Yeah, very good, yes.
Well, this is really, to me, the budget is really very comprehensive, and at the same time, this is the first step of many budgets to come, right, in the direction that to bring Singapore forward. I'm certainly quite uplifted by the upskilling program, and I also see that there's a lot more things in there that puts me more hopeful for the future. Things that we will not see reap the gains in the next 5 years or so, but then definitely it is a long game itself. On the energy transition, on the energy security, on the kind of investments that they are already looking at to make sure that we stay on the technological curve, and even on some of the tax rules itself. I mean, we are dealt with the hand that is given, but we will make the best out of it. And the commitment that they put in itself is that whatever they collect from BEPS, right, they are going to power it back to the economy, which is again trying to grow, trying to make the productivity gains from there, which comes back to the point of how do we try to get that 2 to 3% growth. The external economy itself, the geopolitics is something that is beyond our control. It's something that we have to live with, but I think put where the world is and where this budget is, I think it's really a good, for us, it's a good direction to bring us forward. Yeah.
So I just to borrow from where Alvin left off, to this year's budget, it is comprehensive, it's forward-leaning, it's pro-enterprise. I think from the businesses' point of view, policy is implementation, so implementation is key. So if I may be so greedy to have 3 wishes, I think the first wish, which is the theme I've been talking about, help our small companies.
Yes.
If you look at the corporate, if you look at the enterprise ecosystem in Singapore, and just to give you some numbers to set the context, about 285,000 companies in Singapore. If you break it by revenue into 4 strata, those that are 100 million and above, there's only 3,000 companies. 1% of the total enterprise is just 3,000. So a big part of our enterprises are below 100 million revenue, right? So I think let's focus on helping them assess the scheme, utilize the scheme. My second wish is really to foster more collaboration in ecosystem. I think we touched on some of these. It's not just government helping businesses, but businesses helping businesses. It's not just about working between the IHLs and the employees, but IHLs with the employer. So foster greater collaboration. And here I will just make a plug, to say that trade associations and business chambers are a good convening and multiplier to help make that happen, because we're more attuned to the business needs. And my third wish really is that now that, not that we've totally gotten it off, but we have addressed the here and now issues, I think really can we take a breath and really ask ourselves, How can we achieve that 2 to 3% economic growth with the 3 constraints that DPM has talked about, manpower, land, as well as carbon. Yes, these are age-old issues. Yes, we have looked at it again and again, but in the spirit of Forward SG, where there was an exercise to engage many general members of the public to define our social compact, can we perhaps do the same with the business community? And perhaps there'll be new ideas on what we can do to seriously overcome some of these constraints, including what we can do in Johor, Singapore, including re-looking at some of our manpower policies on foreign workers, and ask ourselves the whole regulatory approach. So can we consider doing that so that collectively, even from the businesses, we can continue to rewrite the next chapter in the Forward SG agenda.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Ping Soon. So thank you very much, Ping Soon, Alvin, Irene, and Walter. Thank you, everyone, for this most insightful discussion. This is the Straits Times Budget 2024 Roundtable, brought to you by UOB. Thank you for watching.